Hi, everyone. Welcome. We've got the Future in Focus here today. My name's Ray Pointer. And just before we move into the show proper, big shout out for all of our sponsors. We love bringing all of these things, but obviously there are costs in creating webinars. There are licenses and packages and video editing and all of that sort of thing. So all of these wonderful companies here make that possible. Next time you're looking for services, do think about visiting them. And if you do talk to anybody from any of these companies, say how great it is they sponsor NewMR, because that will create a virtuous cycle. So today we're going to go to a panel discussion. I've got three. There are three of us. I've got two guests. Barry Jennings, who would normally be in Seattle from the Insight team at Microsoft, but is currently in Mexico. Alexandra Kuzmina, futurist researcher from NewMR in the UK, and of course myself. And what we're going to do is we're going to go, each of us has brought a topic with us, and we're going to talk about that topic. Then we're going to throw it open for conversation, and we're going to look to see what sort of questions you all have, or observations, or whatever. So you've got the Q&A tool. You can ask a question there. Frankly, I think asking it in chat is great, because then everybody gets to see it, everybody can join in. But whichever way you want to do it is fine. So with that, Barry, welcome, and let's go to your topic.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. One of the things that when Ray reached out and said, hey, think about the future of market research and insights, I'm like, well, I am forced to do that like almost every day. At Microsoft, my boss has these core priorities for all the leadership, for everyone on the leadership team. And one is learning about AI. That's what I do. My research practice covers cloud and data and AI and all that fun stuff. But we also have one on using AI. And as we start to really lean into AI and think about how it will transform our practice, I have to start thinking about, well, what does that mean? And I believe that client insights teams are going to be more efficient, more effective, and more impactful right where the decisions are being made. I mean, our job fundamentally is we create, acquire knowledge and insights and deliver that across the business. And when I first started in research many moons ago, there was this thing called the research triangle. Things could be either good, fast, or cheap. Pick two. And for years and years, that sort of was the research struggle. Now, I think in the not too distant future, it's going to be more like a rectangle where things can be faster, cheaper, better, and more impactful. Pick all four. And by faster, I think the combination of artificial intelligence and human wisdom is going to make the researcher of tomorrow way faster in a whole lot of different ways. Stakeholders should be able to deliver a better research brief more quickly if they're assisted by an AI chatbot or co-pilot that can probe and provide input in that conversation. Maybe share what's already known, give them initial estimates on cost and timing before they even reach an analyst. As a corporate researcher, my team gives me lots of feedback that says, wow, you wouldn't believe this research brief. And then they have to have a meeting. And then we meet with them, and then they redo the brief. And then we have another meeting. And then we say, okay, well, here's our guests, and we engage a research partner. And then we have a kickoff meeting, and we revisit the brief, and then we really find out what they want. And that is 2 meetings, a few weeks, and way more time than we think. And I think that there's a lot of room to make that way more efficient. And we're trying to explore what that can mean. I also think researchers will be able to query open ends and qualitative transcripts instantly on the fly, which will help deliver insights faster, revisit older pieces of work that we've done, and get new information out of that nearly instantly. Or use that information to answer the questions that people are already asking. Yeah, hopefully that can help you winnow things down and just make everything faster. I think another thing that will happen is synthesizing across projects. We have a lot of projects going on. We have a long history of projects. What happens when you can go remine that data, come up with new insights, again, pull more of that data together and better understand what we currently know and ask better questions about what we don't know. And that will just save us a hell of a lot more time. And so faster, I think, is kind of the easy button. Cheaper, I think once all data is more easily found, analyzable, it can be mined for new insight. Research can have an almost, I like this zero waste concept, because our data footprint will be pretty massive. It's an asset that you could continually go to. It'll have a longer life. You can, again, re-ask, you can probe and probe again. As a researcher, I know we put in more questions than we should. I have that phlebotomist theory. If I'm going to go stick a needle in an arm and draw a little blood, well, I may as well get as much blood out as I can. And we use that as a research team to ask a few questions that are beyond what our stakeholder asks, just so that we can deepen our thought leadership. And when you're able to do that, we never go back. It's hard to go back. We can always get money to go ask yet a new question. But when it's easier to do that, we can lean into that and hopefully not do some research or use that investment to actually learn net new things. We think data will sit on data clouds that can be quickly found, reanalyzed. Researchers can find similar questions across multiple projects and generate graphics that show multiple data points across multiple pieces of time, even though they may not be from a singular market tracker. Will it be perfect? No, it will never be perfect. But if it can stop something net new, that's a win. If it can answer a question today and save weeks of time and a little bit of money, yeah, we want to do that. And, less need, if we have less need to commission research, from a volume perspective, when we do invest, let's go deeper. Let's re-examine what we know and create a much richer environment based off of really what we know from multiple angles, multiple pieces of work, so that we can get to the root of the questions that we need to do. And again, we would aspire to do shorter, sweeter pieces of work. And I think that becomes a real possibility, and maybe a whole lot more of those smaller things, so that we are more continually learning. The fourth thing in terms of better, I think tighter connections can be made across multiple projects. Primary and secondary and data science are just going to be integrated. Everything will be richer and more actionable. The ability to tie perceptual data with behavioral data is a challenge, and many times we think that will be easier. And again, I think it will get our researchers to also get a better view and more abilities to pull in data about how the business works, how the business operates. So we actually know what we need to move in terms of driving revenue or growing share or whatever it takes. I think another thing is, and hopefully Ray will go into this a little bit in his talk, I believe synthetic sample can potentially represent difficult to reach audiences, geographies, and allow us to deliver a fuller view of customers. We do trade-offs all the time. I would love to say, well, 100% of my projects are globally representative of every geography and every region that we sell in. Our business makes a whole lot of money, but we don't make that much money. And we absolutely don't have that much time. But if we could represent a few regions, and if we had synthetic sample to potentially represent points of views in other regions or other audience types, that's going to make that piece of work richer in and of itself. It's going to make it better. And our ability to find ways to string that together build confidence in that, use it when we can, learn from it, and again, be more intentional about when we do make those research investments. I just think that's going to make our research practice better all the way around. And then lastly, I had to actually make up a word. I like this word. It's called impactfuler. Okay, well, it should be more impactful. I think insights professionals will be better in the room where the decisions are being made, because there will be near instant access to all of the data, right? Not just the data on the page. I've been in many a meeting, and the most powerful person in the room, she will have a question. Hey, what about this customer? Hey, we are growing in this region and not that region. Or, you know what? I just got through talking with the CEO, and he said, let's pivot this way. And yes, we realize that you did this research weeks and weeks ago, but you missed a market, you missed an audience. What about this? Being able to say, well, my current position is, hey, we'll get back to you. Let's set up some time, and we will go and do what it takes to go do that. If I could say, hold on a second, and maybe have an analyst on my team in that meeting as well, looking at that, searching for that question. And if we could, in that room, say, it's not perfect data, but two countries in that region, we have very similar data, and we can look at our behavioral data and we can see how that pattern worked out with this thing and did this with that thing, and say, hey, we are fairly confident that this will happen with this audience, and here's why. Data-led, it's going to drive a conversation in that room with that leader that would take me about a month to reschedule anyway. And a decision will be made, or an action will be kicked off. Or oftentimes they'll say, hey, let's go dig a little bit deeper. But it's these newer set of questions because you've taught me already that this is okay, this thing is not okay, this thing that's not okay. These are the two things that we just don't know. That is the next research project. And because I've saved time and money and all the other things, I can probably afford to go do that pretty quickly. Like I said earlier, the ability to link perceptual and attitudinal data, maybe to simulate changes in relationships in that data. All those things become really strong possibilities, if not probabilities. The Q&A section becomes a much more informed conversation. It becomes a thing that has more answers in it. And then hopefully we are leaving with one or two questions to go ask, not 4 or 5. And those meetings probably, quite frankly, become easier and easier to put on people's calendars because they know that they're not only going to get rich data, which we think they get today, and they tell us that, but they get much closer to a decision-making situation, or at least a situation where they can take the data to the right set of folks who can make that big decision. And they're better armed because of us. And I think that's how our future is going to be, or at least I aspire for it to be that way.
Excellent, Barry. Thanks. And we've already got someone typing a question into the chat, and I'm going to deconstruct that question into 2 parts, because there's a reference in the question to best practices. And with everything changing so much, is that a false standard or a false god to be establishing best practices at the moment, do you think?
Yeah, I can tell you in our case, it is a custom project every time right now. I will say certain motions are improving in certain areas. So like we have a big chunk of satisfaction work in one place. It's really lined up pretty well, qual and quant, and our ability to make those connections because it's data with our own customers. That works pretty well. It becomes more spurious when it's a broader question. You're dealing with multiple regions. It's a novel concept. But again, I think at some point, once all that data is starting to sit in new places, it's a muscle that you build to figure out, or maybe it's not a muscle, maybe it's a ligament structure. Once you've figured out how to connect all that stuff, then you make the muscles work better together. I know nothing about the human body, it seems, but it felt like a great thing to say.
So on the second one, what are the sorts of things you mentioned one there that you're trying to do to link data across, to do that integration, to make it less cumbersome? And just to give you a highlight from another company, we had Heineken come along to an SMR function recently, and one of the things they were doing was creating an avatar type interface where execs could ask question of the accumulated insights. And the aim is for that to be in natural language conversations as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a compelling idea. And if the organization can consume that data that way, I think that's a great thing to consider. Sometimes it's that chat bot, in terms of the amount of volumes of information, the way that it might be able to spit that out and put it in a way that you can sort of put it into another communication medium, like a slide or a memo. That I think is useful as well. I think that's going to be a function of what the organization needs. And again, I think what I reserve to dramatically change my mind today, a week from now, and a month from now, because things are changing pretty fast. Some people have challenges with a legless avatar, and some people think it's the greatest thing ever. It's really cool. I do think so. So we did a thing where we did a synthesis piece of work. I hired a company to do this. We ask a set of questions multiple times a year over several years, and we said, hey, let's pull all of that together for this new executive and produce a report. We hired a company to do that. They pulled all this stuff together. It took 150 hours. I think we paid close to, I don't know, 20 grand. And we put it in this tool and we said, hey, synthesize that. And it was 97% faster and 87% cheaper. And when I asked the analyst to rate the efficacy of what we paid for versus what we had our AI to do, the thing we bought was an 8.5 on a scale of 1 to 10, and the AI thing was a 7 out of 10. As a client researcher, I got to think, what are the applications where 7 out of 10 is good enough? And what money does that not make me spend? What time does that not make me use so that we can focus on bigger problems? And I think those types of decisions are the things that will drive how we might do those, what that interface may be, and how we might tackle a whole lot of the other problems, like how we might string the data together in ways that'll make it more impactful. Because I would love to say it would be, what was that movie? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I think that's the dream. But at this date, it's process, and we've got to learn what those priorities are.
So we do have another question in there, but I actually know from a prior conversation that anything that affects the share price of Microsoft is not something that Barry can talk about today. So that is really useful, Barry. Thanks for that. It's been a great start. If anybody wants to type in any additional questions during the session, feel free to do that. But I'm going to move the show along. We're going to hear from Alexandra, who should now be, and we're going to turn our cameras off because Alex has got some slides. And you should be able to take control from there.
Yep, all good. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Frey, and hello, everybody. My name is Alexandra Kuzmina, and I work in the Nova Tech Innovation team at NewMR, a global consumer and sensory research agency. And I'm here to share with you some of the really interesting work that we've done to essentially make quant research a bit more human, that we've done in collaboration with several brands. as well as some MMR self-funded work. And as a team, Nova, we constantly scan the tech horizon, looking beyond solutions that are built for research or res tech, and looking for various signals of change from emerging technology, and understanding if these signals of change become a norm, how might MMR and the whole industry be different? And if it seems that something is addressing some of the key challenges that we face, we then start to investigate, and then we actually roll up our sleeves and experiment with that technology. So we always put technology to a test, because we don't believe in tech for tech's sake, because you need to have the evidence that it can deliver better insights compared to more traditional methods, so it can be cheaper, quicker, all those things that Barry was talking about. But otherwise, why bother, right? And just because it is the next new and shiny does not mean it could be a worthy investment, or would it even deliver on what the suppliers were promising in this AI-powered everything day and age. So we started this work to essentially address the elephant in the room, which is the participation crisis. And I know that Ray himself repeatedly warned about it. And the participation crisis is essentially twofold. So we've got, we keep hearing about lack of engagement in research, especially in quant from survey panel providers. That lead to sometimes not so good data quality. So we had a question whether emerging technology can help avoid any data quality disasters and make the experience more personable, attract wider audience beyond the serial survey takers, and improve the data quality so clients can be more confident in the decisions they're making, and ultimately help future-proof our industry. So we started experimenting with augmented reality, holograms of researchers, not participants, in quant surveys. So let me play what the experience looked like.
Welcome to this project. I work for a market research company called NewMR Research, and we like to run projects a little bit differently here. Today we're testing out this new hologram feature, as we hope this way of taking surveys will be more interesting and engaging for you. It also gives us the opportunity to introduce ourselves as the people who will be reading your responses on the other side.
Okay, so this augmented reality experience was really good for those people who engage with it. So it gave a sense of physical presence, as if the researcher was there in the same room with them. But at the same time, we saw a massive dropout rate, which made this technology just not viable to pursue, at least not just yet. And we decided to keep experimenting, and we moved to generative AI. And with generative AI, you can generate an avatar to say anything you type in any language, thanks to real-time video synthesis technology. So we have been experimenting with adding AI-generated video avatars of researchers to standard quant surveys, because we hypothesized that it would still feel human enough to increase survey engagement. Let me play what that experience looked like. Here we go.
Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm Jane. Well, this is my digital avatar. I'm part of the team at NewMR Research. I will personally be reading your answers, understanding your views, and making recommendations to our clients. Your honest feedback plays a key role in helping our clients to develop and improve their products. This survey won't take much of your time, no more than 10 minutes. Please make sure you complete the survey in full to receive your reward. Enjoy the survey. Hi.
Oh,
Hi.
here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through some of the key learnings that we have from across multiple experiments that we have run in the UK and also in Indonesia. And some of these experiments were standard online quant surveys, concept tests, some were chatbots, and it was always a multi-cell approach, meaning that we had always had control cells to with no intervention, so to compare the results with. So one of the key things that we wanted to understand is whether introducing this generative AI content impacts on the way people perceive the rest of the questionnaire, especially the themes that we show them and the concepts that we put in front of them. And I'm very pleased to report that in all our studies, the key metrics like purchase intent or overall liking, they were stable. And so we learned that while it is a new and dynamic way to engage participants, it does not really bias the way they perceive the rest of the survey, which is exactly what we want to see. And we also learned that avatars can help. They can help to increase engagement and improve the data quality. For example, we had really positive results in the UK. So we saw 44% more words on average where the avatar was present. And so they were not just any words, but they were thematically more meaningful and useful. So the avatars can help, but to do that effectively, they need to be culturally and contextually appropriate. And the study that we did in Indonesia, for example, we had an all-female sample because what we tested was some cooking condiment ideas, and female audience was the target demographic. And participants engaged really well with the female avatars, but they were, let's say, a little bit more reserved with the male one, and some even commented for their preference to have a female avatar. So we saw that the closer we can mirror the audience and the closer we are to the target audience with the avatar, the more positive and the experience is, and the more helpful people will be in their responses. And last but not least, optimized technology for context. So one of the biggest surprises in our study in Indonesia was that all the cells with the avatar resulted in quite a big spike in the dropout rate. So we had 43% dropout rate compared to only 8% in our control cell. So we don't know why those people dropped out. We can only hypothesize. And what we do know is that 85% of those who completed the survey took it on their mobile device. So we can, again, hypothesize maybe they were, worried about depleting their data. Maybe the connection was not stable, or it was just inconvenient at the time. They didn't have their headphones, etc. So these findings show that it's so important to experiment with these new things before rolling them out, because it helps us also to come up with best practices to try and mitigate these challenges like the massive dropout rate that I mentioned. Well, also it could help us think about the how to mitigate them. So we could put reassurances, for example, around mobile data, and also managing expectations that a video is coming and how long it might be. So thinking about the future and looking into the future with the question that I had at the start, there will be some technology that I think it's already clear the path ahead, that there will be some technology that will drive personability, and it is very likely to be around the evolution of these avatars, and they're likely to be culturally and contextually appropriate. And who knows, maybe at some point there will be a technology where participants will be able to choose the avatars that they are willing to engage with themselves, rather than us as researchers trying to make those decisions for them. And we also know that Gen Zs, for example, love to be in control. So to illustrate that, I'd like you to think about conversational AI, like chatbots that we have been using in market research for a number of years now, and also voice technology that we've been also experimenting with at NOVA quite extensively. So these two currently separate technologies will merge together to power the digital human avatars, like the one that you saw today. But it's not going to be a video. it is likely to be a two-way conversation. And this conversation would be possible at scale, meaning that finally, quote unquote, will no longer be seen as separate. It will be just research. And we're not just reporting on the signals of change, we're driving this change with our next experiments. And I would like to invite you to join the NOVA Partnership Initiative if you'd like to hear more about this and other innovation streams that we're working on, as well as to get invitations to pilot studies and co-funding opportunities. Thank you very much. I see some questions in the chat there. Okay.
Well, our camera is back on for Barry and myself. Thank you, Alexandra. You will be getting a copy of the slides, everybody, later on, so you'll be able to go back to the barcode. I'm going to be slightly self-indulgent here. Barry and I, half a lifetime ago, both worked for a company called IntelliQuest. And this reminds me so much of all of the test and compare of all those big tracking studies. And we were trying to work out what happens when we go from paper and pencil to the internet, what happens when we go from CATI to the internet. And it's really important that people are doing this testing as opposed to simply making the change, I think, Barry.
Totally agree. It's it's a paradigm shift. You missed one of those things. I remember back in the days, we did this thing called disk by mail.
Oh, yes.
Where people, we would mail them a 3.5-inch floppy disk. They would put it in their computer, execute the survey, and then mail it back. And that was novel back then and probably heretical today. And I am sure as this evolves, that will come, that these things will find their way in their place, and we will understand what that data means. My guess is that some ways they may be more expressive, more deep and rich in some ways. And yeah, how does it change how we understand these things? And who does it bring in that maybe we're not bringing in today? Which I think is some of the things that I'm really excited to understand.
And for the younger people in the audience, a floppy disk is a thing that looks like a save icon on your computer. So the predominant questions, Alexandra, is thoughts about why it might have had that level of dropout. So you don't know, but what are your sort of leading thoughts about what it might have been driving that process?
Yeah, that's essentially the cornerstone question, why that happened. We can only hypothesize. So, for example, we had a massive dropout rate with the augmented reality holograms because this was an external link, so people had to click on an external link from the quant survey, and maybe they were cautious about new technology. Maybe they didn't want to click on external links, or maybe both. So, and that first experiment happened a year ago, so things might have changed already, kind of a few months past. And we also checked for different kind of demographics. Maybe we had a hypothesis whether younger people might be more receptive to it, and we didn't see much difference, to be honest, which is interesting in itself. Now, with there was also a big spike in dropout rate in our study in Indonesia with the AI avatars. And again, the dropout rate was kind of around the double what we observed in Europe, which is interesting because it just tells you that there's no one size fits all. So what worked in the UK does not work clearly in Indonesia. Yeah, we just need to keep trying and keep looking for ways to engage with those markets better.
Super. And any thoughts about how you might be able to follow up? One of the things that occurred to me is if you were working with an online community, it's much easier to contact these people afterwards to say, oh, you didn't finish the survey. Can we have a chat?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we can do some user research on them specifically, and it's actually something we would like to do. Moving on, so these were just recruited from online panels, and there's no way for us to follow up. But I suppose if you have a more sort of engaged community, then definitely the results would be a lot more positive.
Now, what about the whole amount of fuss of creating an avatar study versus just grabbing a survey platform and creating an online survey? Number of hours, number of different moving parts, number of partners. How much heavier is it, and how much heavier might it be in the future? Because presumably it should get easier.
It should get easier, definitely, especially if we're looking into the future where, we might not be programming chatbots, but we'll be programming these guys, this AI-powered interviewers. But currently, it's not very laborious process. It's very straightforward, and it's very cost-effective as well. It does add a little bit of a step, of course, to be able to add it to your standard processes and workflows. But sometimes, as we've seen with the UK study, sometimes it's worth it, and we need to keep testing to see whether it's going to, bring the return on investment in other markets or languages.
Brilliant. And yeah, Barry's asking in there in the chat, as you can see, about just asking people to be recontacted. Barry, have you had much experience yet in Microsoft with some of these?
I have not. We have discussions about them a lot. We've done a lot of research on avatars and the metaverse. It's a whole lot of research, especially on the industrial side. And what I can share is the UI is that's the thing, right? And it's critical. The use case and the UI are so important. But yeah, the way you're doing, we've not quite done anything like that, but we definitely look at those types of tools in different situations.
And again, for the older listeners, you may remember a presidential candidate, Ross Perot. An avatar of Ross would probably be a lot more realistic. I don't know if you remember, Barry, he didn't blink.
That's true. I'd say bring back Max Headroom.
Yes, Max. Okay, that's wonderful. So we're going to go on now to the third piece, which is me, and we're going to have a quick thought about synthetic data. I'm going to very quick introduction to what I mean by synthetic data, and then the big non-question, and then we can go a bit more into it. So synthetic data has been around for quite a while. Every time you do choice-based modeling and you do hierarchical Bayes, you're creating synthetic people. All that data you're modeling, nobody gave you that. It's made up data from the people you saw, saying, well, if we had asked more questions, this is what it might have looked like. When we use data fusion, so we take some demographic data, we take some media consumption data, and we fuse them together, then we're creating synthetic data within that. There's a lot of techniques around, like synthetic eye tracking, where instead of showing 100 people your new packaging and track their eyeballs, it shows the packaging to an AI-trained piece of software that will predict where the eyeballs go. And that is a fairly well-established technique. But the fuss at the moment really is about two types of synthetic data. One is creating qualitative personas, which you can then have a conversation with. And the second one is creating personas which you can serve up quantitative surveys to and pull back those responses. And the main debate that tends to happen at the moment is it works or it doesn't work. And that's in many ways not really the point, because that's just a testing thing. We can find out when it works and when it doesn't. But what is clear is you can design a test where it works. To give you a very simple example, I designed 3 new ice creams. One of them tastes like heaven. One of them tastes rubbish, but it won't kill you. And one of them tastes rubbish and it will kill you. So I test those 3 concepts on Bard or ChatGPT or any of these tools, and it will give me the correct ranking. No problem, because it's a really easy test. Now I ask it to predict what the polling is going to be in the presidential election next week, and it's really going to struggle. if it's really smart, it'll say no different to this week because that's the safest bet. But beyond that, it is really going to struggle. So we can see why it will do some and why it won't do others. At the moment, if you wanted to show a picture of something to synthetic data, you could be pretty sure that that is not going to work because we don't have a method of moving from the pictures to the articulation at the moment. But every time you hear somebody talking about synthetic data, and it does work or it doesn't work, just keep adding this phrase "at the moment." Because imagine that we got synthetic data working really well. So in 2024, we only use synthetic data. What would we do in 2025? Because we wouldn't have collected more primary information and we'd have a struggle going forward. Some of the most interesting options I'm seeing out there in synthetic data is where people are collecting, say, 500 more interviews, and they're then fleshing that up with additional information to make an enhanced data set. That is potentially very interesting. It's something that the Unilevers of this world could be in a very strong position to do, that the Dynators of this world could be in a very strong position to do, where they potentially learn from the synthetic data as we go through. So it's going to be really dynamic. It's going to be much harder to say whether it works than the avatars that Alexandra was just showing us, because it is going to be so much more case by case. And just because it works this time doesn't mean it will work next time. So we've got quite a lot more things to do before we can establish where synthetic data happens. And of course, there is perhaps one more important thing than does it work, which is, do some clients believe it works? Because if some clients believe it works, it's faster and it's cheaper, and they are going to use it. And coming back to Barry's point about speed, I can see a situation where we have a meeting going on and somebody says, do we know how many people would switch if we offered this? And the answer is no, but if you can give me 20 minutes, I'll run this through the synthetics, which is kind of what Barry was talking about earlier. And I can give you an approximation here and now that is going to show you how well it works. But I'm also going to pick up on Barry's example of 7 versus 8.5, because they only have to have an overlap of 5.5. Let's say there's 100% going on. One of them gives you 85% of the answer. One gives you 7% of the answer. They only have to overlap 55%. So if we measure the new technique just against what we currently do, we can miss out on the additional information, because that 7 could contain the whole of the 1.5% that's missing from the 8.5. So we can't just test synthetic data against existing market research techniques, because we know existing market research techniques aren't perfect. We need some way of looking against testing synthetic data against real market outcomes, against real decisions, if we're going to be going forward in a stronger way with that. So coming to my two fellow panelists, Alex, have you tried working with synthetic data yet as part of your experiments?
Yes, I have to some extent, and I've tried one of the examples that you've given, and sometimes even that might fail around the ice cream, and that will kill you. Yeah, what about you, Barry?
Yes, absolutely. We make AI, so it's in our interest to really understand what it is, what it can do, and what it won't do. What I can say is, and this is more a belief than anything, it will get better, and it'll be more and more useful over time. I don't know if that's measured in quarters, years, or decades. I don't know that yet. I suspect it won't be decades. I think before the call, you were talking about politicians who might not fully understand numerical relationships very well. There are times where decisions must be made. And if you're in a certain situation, you will never have perfect information. And if cost, time, and impact are all sort of on the table, there may be situations where probably good answer is good enough for this type of a decision. How much time, energy, and focus does that take off the table for you to put against something where you can invest and be more certain and be more rigorous? I've been in research a very long time, and I have brought tons of research and seen data scientists and all sorts of folks come in at a company and deliver an answer that was rigorous, well thought out, spent a whole lot of money, took a whole lot of time. And the decision was made because an executive had 2 conversations with customers, and it felt right.
Yeah.
And it was the right decision, ultimately. And so, again, and I'm not trying to say that to try to upend our entire industry, because that's probably a rare case. But decision making is complicated, and when you're dealing with humans, well, I think that's the thing that's going to at least keep me employed until I decide to retire. And I think our function will be safe. It may look a little different, but because there are people involved, there will always be a need for people to be spoken to and to think through the answers and ultimately to make a decision. I think at the end of the day, these intelligence tools will serve up really good information, but somebody's going to make a decision on certain type classes of problems always.
So I'm going to go back again to our the internet days when it was coming in. When we started using the internet on a larger scale, people like the Harris panel and Greenfield, about 30% of people had access to the internet. So we were subtly sampling 30% instead of nearly 100%. We did side-by-side studies. Online was not as good, but it was faster and cheaper. And faster and cheaper is really seductive. As Barry says, when you've got to make a decision, the choice was no research or this not quite as good, but faster and cheaper. And I think that is clearly going to be a driver. And I think we in the UK, it behooves us, and in the US, it behooves us to create some guidelines of how to avoid things that are going to go wrong. There's a published paper that quite a lot of people are sharing of creating a perceptual map of car brands with real respondents and with synthetic data. It's almost the perfect definition of something that is likely to work with synthetic data. What are the words that come into your mind when you think about these brands of cars? Because LLMs are designed to forecast what people would say when asked this question historically. And the attitude towards BMW this year is pretty similar to last year, is pretty similar to the year before. We're talking about really strong, established, shared views throughout society within the one country where the sampling was done. So that is almost like a test you'd expect it to do. And I think people need to keep an eye on that. And I see that in the chat, is very similar to the start of mobile first. Absolutely.
I think research, to our credit, we have to adapt to what's in front of us. And, I remember when we started first doing mobile first, I was crushed. You can't do a 25-minute mobile first survey. And, my senior executives who, I could reach, difficult, they weren't going to really try and do a survey on the phone. And these millennials who we needed to talk to, these folks who were developers and very techy, that was the only way to reach them. And so part of my practice got really, really strong, while the other part got really, really, fraught full of fear. And then today, I could not imagine not being mobile first.
Yeah. So, anybody out there have any thoughts or questions on the three topics we've covered today? All while you've got a futurist and one of the leading lights of Microsoft here. Any questions other than those that might impact the share price? So just having a look there. So while we're waiting to see if everyone types anything, Alexandra, what's the cleverest thing you've seen, or the thing that's caught your eye recently the most? Was there anything, for example, in APAC that was really different, or thought, oh wow, that's cool? Doesn't have to be AI.
That's a really good question, Ray. I was just gonna add to the previous conversation about what you mentioned about the synthetic data, and I'm really worried that it's gonna make things kind of the mediocre shine, and almost a commodification of creativity. And the perceptual map that you mentioned, it will work on like brands and UNAs and things like that, but it wouldn't work on things like the actual products that people consume or hold in their hands or use. And I mean, it's just makes me worried about the true innovation. And I suppose I'm quite interested in what Barry has to say about this, actually.
It keeps me awake at night. We had a program, still may have it. And it's great when stakeholders and anybody at the company has a conversation with the customer. It is awesome. It's hard for us when someone says, hey, we talked to customers and 80% of them love this brand new product, especially when you put the button on the left side. Well, we're researchers and we're like, oh, wow, cool. What was your method? Who did you talk to? Where'd you talk to them about? Well, we flew to New York and we talked to 10 banking customers across 3 days in their offices, and they knew who we were. I'm not saying that that's bad information. I'm not, but that is not 80% of any market. And as a researcher, I am obligated when we see some of those things to make sure that we provide the right context, to make sure that the decider understands what that data means. Just like when data science, a lot of people, really smart people, can kind of do a 2x2 and present massive amounts of data. Great. What's the context of that data? Who are those people? If you've done a piece of research and it's just from our database of our customers, let's say, and we got lots of them, but it does not represent the world. And there are certain portions of the market that we're not really strong at or may not be well represented. And you're right, it's really easy to make a beautiful PowerPoint slide. We do love PowerPoint here. That looks great. And is it highly credible? And thoughtfully and honestly done, for sure. It does not mean that it's not wrong. It does not mean that it may be misleading. And research skills, providing the right context. And we're not perfect. If we were, you guys wouldn't be talking to me if I were perfect. I wouldn't have time for this.
Yeah,
but that's the job, I think.
And what shiny thing has come across your table, or the various conferences and calls you've been involved in?
I'm the wrong person to ask this. I'm attracted to every shiny object. Your demo, Alexandra, was awesome. I can see so many use cases for something like that. I'm probably going to go to my team and say, we should try this thing, because I think everything has a place. It's just a matter of us finding the right place and being on the journey to find it the right home to make things better.
So I'm going to kind of wind up with something which I've now seen 3 times in about 8 weeks, which has made me worry about one of the directions, which is the Western-centric nature of a lot of the modern innovation, particularly US-centric. So 3 times I've seen a presentation recently, including once in Asia-Pacific, where one of the diagnostic tools was to use Jungian archetypes to express them on the basis these are universal. Well, these are universal for 1920s Austria and Switzerland, which actually may not be for the whole planet. And so many of the constructs we're seeing are very Western in structure. And I think we could be losing something in that way of thinking about things. And in fact, there's a phrase that Alina Hallen uses, which she has taken from elsewhere, which is the weird, white, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, I think is the combination. And so much of our learning is coming out of there, that could be a really significant bias in a lot of the new tech.
Yes, definitely, Ray. Yeah, we've noticed looking at many solutions that are sometimes positioned for market research. But if you dig deeper and if you ask questions around like what theories that this is based on, and so it's I haven't seen a tool that is not doing that, unfortunately. So it would be great if suppliers listening in would be willing to experiment, for example, if we're talking about emotions, to cluster those emotions and seeing what happens first, rather than just labeling them and kind of assigning them to it. But a really interesting area, and there are lots of a lot of self-funded work that we've done in the area as well. So and Lisa Feldman sorry, I'm not pronouncing her name correctly. Lisa Feldman, I think is one of the key figures in research in this space.
Super.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that's one of those time things. At some point, these models will become, or smart people everywhere. And these models will be made in Africa, in Asia, and in everywhere, and be put in. I know there are things trying to figure out how do we put native thinking in. All sorts of stuff is possible, and that has to happen in order for this to be the best thing. This weird thing, I think, is I love that acronym. That's new to me. I think I do B2B primarily. And I will say certain things we're learning are much easier to provide context for in the B2B space, and then much, much, much easier in the consumer space. And I think the culture part of it is absolutely more complicated in the consumer space from my perspective. It's easy in the world of global business English, whatever the heck that means. But you can find deciders that at least it's not their first language or their first culture. They can at least understand because they have to navigate that. I think that's difficult in consumer. And I believe Japan, for example, thinks about AI very differently than we do in much of the West. I think they think about nature and its power very differently than we do. It's in some cultures, nature's a thing to be conquered. In other cultures, nature is a thing to flow with. And those are two very different perspectives that challenge how you interact with things and where you position yourselves in the grand scheme of things. And so, yeah, that is an area I think will be painful in the short to midterm. And I don't know when the right time will come. But again, the optimist in me says the more models that are out there, and maybe the more of those models are connected, you'll have that richer, more robust understanding. And it will almost always be problematic because you won't be able to represent every culture equally.
So a couple of really useful things in the chat stream if people want to keep an eye on it. So that's good there. There's a question in the chat stream about tools approaches. What have you seen that you would not have expected? Actually, the two biggest things that I've seen in my career were not tech. So one was the introduction of semiotics into research, particularly by Virginia Valentine in the UK in the 80s. And it's still only emerging. as a general discipline around in the research world, and the use of narrative techniques. Last 10, 12 years, more people talk about narrative economics, narrative analysis, the coherence of stories, but not in the way that we often think about storytelling as a method of presenting. And a lovely example of another associated one by Ruby in the Asia Pacific conference recently, story living, trying to get your client to live the story rather than tell them the story. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing. So 3 lovely innovations, none of which are tech. They're all to do with people. And after all, we're in a people business. I don't know if either of you have seen anything that came through as surprising or unlooked for. Okay, well, if you do in the next couple of minutes, type it into the chat stream, because I'm going to head on to the closing announcements. Big shout out of thanks to all the sponsors. And of course, really big thank you to everybody who's turned up, asked questions, put in additional thoughts, and especially Alexandra and Barry for joining me today. And Barry, I guess it's not necessarily a work trip to Mexico, so a double thank you. It's great to have you here.
Great being here.
Thank you very much, guys.
Okay, bye for now.